Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aminata Konde. Before we get started, I want to say a big thank you to all the attendees and to those watching on social media. Everyone is currently muted and will be unmuted during the Q&A. Questions can be typed in the chat while our guest speaker is presenting. We will read the questions out loud so the guest speaker can respond to them. Please note that this session is being recorded. Welcome to SLinT TechTalk. This is an informative virtual networking series talking about technology in Sierra Leone. SLinT is a non-profit organization developed to drive innovation in the technology sector in Sierra Leone. Part of that innovation is to empower our members with accurate technology information that will help them gain knowledge about where we are and where we're going with technology. This is the first of a bi-weekly Tech Talk SLinT will be hosting. Our topic today is IT policies and regulations in Sierra Leone. Our panelists are Alie Bangura, the Interim Secretary General at SLinT and owner of ITC Technologies and ICT Academy. Tamba Lamin, our Interim President at SLinT and a Managing Partner and CEO of TPI Cent. Finally, we are honored to have a member of SLinT and the head of policy and legislation and strategy at the Ministry of Information and Communications. He is an upbeat, self-motivated fellow with leading IT roles within the government sector in Sierra Leone. He is a first generation industry certified professional with over 18 years of practical experience with passion and dedication to transform technology in Sierra Leone. He is very instrumental to the academia in Sierra Leone, serving as an assistant teacher at Njala University and a lecturer with the engineering faculty of Rebay College. And last but not least, he's a techpreneur with an innovation lab committed to commercialize local product this year. Mr. James Cobba, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today and on policies and regulations in Sierra Leone. James will have the floor for 30 minutes to present on the topic, followed by questions from our President Tamba Lamin and our Secretary General Alie Bangura. With that said, the floor is yours, James. Thank you.
You can see on the screen, that's just me. And I feel honored and elated to be part of what we're doing here today, because I know there are a lot of sound minds here. I think I have to put my timing on, because I could speak like hours on ending. I want us to go to the presentation directly, but I would like to ask you guys to excuse me a bit, because this is about the first time we are engaging, and there's a lot of questions that you may like to know about Sierra Leone in a couple of things. And based on my experience on the job, I would love to give us this complete summary of things. So this is the outline of the presentation, historical timeline of where all of this started, the ideal environment, policies, legislation, regulations, and strategy. The reason how I'm doing that is basically because there could be a situation where somebody may want to ask a question because of what I have said and what I may not have said that is of interest. So I just wanted to give us a complete summary of the whole environment. So historically, this is what has happened in the past, right? There is also another concern I would like to just address even before we move further, which is the fusion between telecommunications and ICTs. Today, you can't really separate the two, because 5G, which is the buzzing technology in that space that we're talking about currently, it's almost end-to-end IT. So you can't really separate the two right now. But for Sierra Leone, IT came in a bit late, I would say, it's telecoms that really has been taking the lead, which is what you will see even from policy and legislative perspective. So because of that, I'll give us the complete history, but in summary. So the whole space really started in 2006, which brought about the Telecommunications Act that led to the establishment of NATCOM, which is the telecommunications regulator. There was an amendment in 2009, which actually transformed the organizational structure. Originally, it was executive secretary. So there were some limitations. So they had to do an amendment to the act that really established the offices of the Director General and as the lead of the institution operationally supervised by a board. In 2014, we had another amendment, which was necessitated by investment that landed the submarine cable. So this was a precondition by the World Bank, who are the sponsors financially, but the gateway has to be liberalized in addition to other things. So that was amended in 2007 so that it could make do of the finances that were available for this process. In terms of ICTs, we've had 2 ICT policies. In 2009, which is really what stimulated the ICT space. It did a lot of things. I wasn't imagining what was done by reason of that instrument until when I had to speak on this, right? It led to the establishment of the National ICT Council. There was also the National ICT Task Force, the establishment of the ICT cadre, the e-government considerations. I would say considerations because by reason of this policy, that's where we started seeing critical investment in infrastructures, like the fiber we are talking today, uptake of e-services at specific ministries like IFMIS, which is what is used to manage the financial system of the entire country. So in 2009, that sets the foundation upon which we are now moving. So in 2017, it's like 2.5 years ago, we knew that infrastructurally, there's been great improvement. We landed the submarine cable, terrestrial networks have been deployed in like 60 to 70% of the entire nation, but there were critical challenges. One of which is delineation of roles and responsibility. Everybody kind of like is saying, I am doing this, I have to do this, I'm doing this. So we still have those challenges, we still have them, which is what is necessitating another review based on the priorities of the current administration. In addition to that, there's commitment to increase broadband investment, not only in terms of outdoor infrastructure, but also across the public sector. So that's basically a summary of where things really started or where they stand. But then times have changed because infrastructure is just a means. What is important to the end user is the services that are created by the codes we write and how they help in terms of productivity, accountability, efficiency, you name them. But with the proliferation of different technologies that are ubiquitous across all sectors, we'll see that there are a lot of challenges, like emerging technologies in terms of blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, you name it, right? So that means our initial priority as a country kind of like is moving naturally to a service-based society. So, which is why when we look at the digital economy, in terms of our priority for digital economy, it's basically leveraging digital technologies to strategically catalyze and enhance productivity in priority sectors for inclusive and sustainable socio-economic diversification in Sierra Leone. Forgive me for the typo. So that is what we see the digital economy as in Sierra Leone. Now, but then putting all of this together in terms of paper and all of whatever we may call it, policies are basically driven by political agenda. So that's why they constantly keep changing. But there are some things that don't easily change. So which is why for an ideal environment that could lead to a sustainable and prosperous ecosystem, just policies are not enough. There are some other elements that need to come together so that we have a sustainable environment. So that ideal environment speaks to primarily four different things. So we have the policy, which really talks about the agenda of the government. This is what we want to do. We have the legislation that really ensures where policies have to be enforced, then legislations have to come in and possibly establishment of institutions. And the established institutions that implement this legislation have to draft regulations. Then, of course, if that policy needs to have mass influence on several sectors of the economy, then you have to put together a strategy of what is really what is it that the policy wants to drive? How do we drive that? What do we need to really drive that? So when you have all four of these in the ecosystem, that environment is ideal and things can be sustained. I'll give you an example. There was an institution that was set up during the previous administration, which was called ABC, Attitudinal and Behavioral Change Secretariat. That was just a policy position. There was no legislative formation, neither regulations or strategy on how to sustain that. Today, it's a new administration and that is dead. But in our space, doing this kind of like protects a lot of efforts that are being done so that our efforts can be sustainable. Which is why NatCom still exists, which is why the IMC, which is the Independent Media Commission, still exists, because they are not just policy-driven efforts, but they are established by legislation. So they have rights to put together regulations. So in our policy development process, policy and legislative development process, these are kind of the practical steps that we take. Firstly, we look at what is it that really the government wants to do? What are the processes and procedures involved? At this level, that is where we do critical engagement. And hopefully we'll be doing an engagement with this team, SLinT.
Yay.
Like government will say, I want to do X, right? And this is defined in the National Development Plan, the medium term for this current administration. That's defined in the medium term National Development Plan. So how can ICT support that based on government priority? We have to look at all those processes and see how the policy and strategy, legislation, and regulations can support the government in achieving that. We also look at industry best practices, let me say good practices, other instruments to which Sierra Leone is a signatory, like the ECOWAS, the AU, and then specialized UN bodies that has to do with the subjects that we want to address. Then if there is need for enforcement after that policy, then we could move into drafting legislations. Then if that has to move further, for example, like we'll say, okay, now we have an e-health strategy that has to be implemented, then there could possibly be the need for the establishment of an institutional framework, maybe an agency that could not only implement, but equally monitor the progress and keeps updating that and reporting. So basically, that's the process we use. This is in relation to the current government, right? Let's look at a few situation analysis here. A lot has been invested in ICTs and telecoms, but across government specifically. But it's more of like brick and mortar thing. We've done huge investment in broadband. We've done huge investment in applications like IFMIS, which is, like I said, is used to manage the finances of the entire country. We've done investment, back-end investment into servers across MBAs. There are a lot of servers deployed all over the place, right? But the thing is, everything is completely segmented. Everybody kind of like doing their own thing, and which is costing government a lot in terms of investment, but little returns as in the value, the latent value of ICTs. So that is pretty much where things were before this administration took over. No biases. It's normal that things have to move from connectivity or infrastructure before you actually climb the ladder of service delivery. So everybody has played their part. But specifically, so let's look at policies. So specifically in terms of policies, we have national ICT policy, like I said, in 2009, that led to the establishment of the National ICT Council, the National ICT Task Force, commitment to connectivity and affordable access. As of today, we have close to like $100 million investment in broadband infrastructure that has gigabit speed, length and breadth. Maybe that could be a discussion for another forum. The establishment of the ICT cadre, where I happen to have been from its formative stage onto the implementation. Data for development, that is trying to see how data can be used for making informed decisions. So institutions were encouraged to move forward with that, right? And e-government consideration. I say consideration because many a time there have been a lot of e-government efforts, not only in Sierra Leone, but across the globe with huge investment. But the key challenge here is acceptance, the ability to accept this thing and commitment to do the same. So in this policy of 2009, that's where considerations started. Now, so in the policy of, so we also have the National Cybersecurity Policy that was slated in, approved by Cabinet in 2016. Basically, it looked at institutional framework, roles and responsibility, and the consideration for a SAT. Because the thing is, like I said, when things are in their infancy, they attract attention and there are opportunities looping around. Everybody wants to do everything. So those are the first things that really need to be addressed going forward. So in 2017, we had a review of the policy. That's the National ICT Policy, which further enforced delineation of roles and responsibility of various sector players, commitment to broadband investment, which is what is now helping us move into the second phase of the National Terrestrial Network, National Fiber Network, that will now span the entire country. It will touch every district and even investment in metro fiber in the major cities. The other thing that the policy did was consolidation of current investment and advancement additional investment in critical ICT and telecoms infrastructure. Like we are assiduously working on our national SAT as a country. We are also doing a lot of investment in terms of ministries, connectivity in terms of ministries, agencies, and departments, seamless access to network-related services. And this policy created a baseline for the uptake of e-services. I mean, there is wider acceptance right now on the role of ICT across government, and thankfully, COVID has just done so much justice because a lot of things are happening online, even locally here. So that is not going to change. And we are thankful for that, meaning our jobs are secured and we can think along with people because they'll be able to understand what we are saying. And then there's a draft, finally, there's a draft digital broadcasting policy, which for me is one of the greatest myths in the technology space for the past 2 or 3 decades. We have not been able to migrate because of a lot of things, but we have a draft policy that speaks to those issues. I wouldn't say we are better off, but I think hopefully someday we'll get there and we'll get it better, because a lot of the countries that have really implemented digital broadcasting, it has been a failure. Because many countries thought that it is an investment that is commercially viable, which is a sad mistake. But that's not for this. But we have a draft that we are hoping that could guide us. We have been seeking investment to make sure that happens, but it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge simply because many have failed to understand that no investor will kind of like invest in the kind of things countries have been presenting, except for the Chinese, who have been doing justice to a couple of countries in Africa, but with serious ramifications. So where are we today? Today, the new administration, even the president from his manifesto, he made it clear that he will embrace e-governance to ensure there is efficiency, productivity, and accountability across government, and reduce the bureaucracies of service delivery across the public space. So one of the things this policy will do, which hopefully upon approval from the leadership of the ministry, it will be shared with a select number of people who are interested in adding value to the process, right? So that we could have a say. So one of the priorities is to consolidate the efforts that have been made, not like normally breaking things down and saying this person did this, I will do this. Thankfully, a lot of things have not been broken. Rather, we are seeing a lot of consolidation happening. Thanks, which is really appreciative of the current administration. So the next priority for this policy is e-service alignment with the midterm national development plan. So there are priority sectors of the economy, like in mining, fisheries, and marine resources, tourism, health, education. All of these cannot, the gains in these sectors cannot be quantified if there are no data that could help in making informed decisions, as in correcting the mistakes and helping do things better. There is also a drive for private sector development through digital innovation and the establishment and empowerment of key institutions, as stated in the delineation of roles and responsibility in the national ICT policies of 2017. As you could see from a statement I made earlier on, that policies change when administrations change and priorities change. That is somehow not good. But then policies are driven by political agenda. But the good thing is, where a policy needs to have a lasting impact, even with the establishment of institutions, then that policy eventually will necessitate a legislation. And once things are done by law, it's difficult to change them. Of course, you could do amendment, but the core of that legislation remains. That's the good thing about our sector. Whilst technology keeps changing, policies and regulations have to be constantly reviewed to make sure they align with those. But changes in legislations are kind of like a bit minimal. So they can be influenced by political decisions, but the effect of which are somehow minimal. This is based on my experience having been in government for a while. But then, so let's go to the legislative part of it. Now, in terms of legislation, when you look on the left-hand side of my screen, I don't know whether it's left or right on your own side, but for me, it's left. The green, decisions for the past decades, decisions on the future of this country has either been made by blue or red, right? I mean, by green or red. So on the green side of things, which is basically things that have been done, it's not primarily SLPP. for things that have been done. The Telecommunications Act of 2006 amended 209 and 14, respectively, as was presented in a historical timeline. The first, I repeat, the first and only ICT-related legislation, which was tabled in Parliament this year, the Electronic Transaction Act. So basically, the Telecoms Act, if I could just throw more light, was just a catch-up. You know, mobile services really started before NatCom started. So it's normal, it's not only here, even in the US. You could agree with me that technology is always ahead of legislations and policies. So we always have to play the catch-up game. So that's nothing strange here. It happened here equally. So NatCom was formed after mobile services started, and the related roles and responsibilities. But NatCom was primarily established as a telecoms regulator, not ICT. So along the way, many times when we discuss, they will begin to say, oh, they are in charge of ICT. So even amongst ourselves, we fight and we tell them, no, you are not in charge. There's nothing validating that because it's not in your act. So, but we want to change that because that's the right thing to do. Because you as the policy ministry and policy and oversight ministry, you cannot be the regulator, and you cannot equally be monitoring or implementing. That's a standard practice across the board. So we want to stay unselfish and do the right thing for the future of the country. So the first ICT-related legislation was passed this year, which is the Electronic Transaction Act. Basically, this was driven as a condition or to help our index in terms of our rating in doing business. It was basically to make sure electronic evidences are admissible in the court of law, just to make them valid. So before now, you cannot present electronic evidence in the court of law. It doesn't carry the evidential weight required for prosecutorial processes. So this was really a big gap. Now we have crossed that space. So we have some other standing instruments like the IMC Act, which really deals with mass media, and the RAIC, which is the Right to Access Information Act. They also are regulators, but established by law. Now, so on the red side of things, which doesn't really mean APC, which means we are still in the dark, but we have made significant efforts along that. It's the Electronic Communications Bill. So this bill is what really now establishes NatCom, hopefully with a change of nomenclature, as the ICTs and telecoms regulator, just like in the US, right? You have the Department of Commerce that really deals with certain aspects of digital related businesses, but it is FCC, Ajipaya and team that really call the shot when it comes to the technology. So that's what we want NatCom to be, hopefully with a change of nomenclature. So they'll be looking into several regulations that has to do with ICTs and telecoms. So amongst those, there will be things like regulations around domain name, regulations around cybersecurity, regulations around data protection and privacy, and all of that, right? So we were actually looking at having a converged legislation that speaks to all of these things, because we realize that all of these instruments are closely related. So we were thinking of having one big book that speaks to everything. But along the way, when we have a change of administration, there was a change of mindset. So we decided to bring in some level of separation as need be. So we currently have a cybersecurity bill that is before the House of Parliament. And hopefully by next week, I'll be in Parliament and the team to start the pre-legislative process and defend that bill. We have a draft in snippets of data protection and privacy bill, because as the digital space grows and access and desire increases in participating on the the digital space, people have to feel confident to relate with the new normal. So we are working on a bill that will speak to that. So for now, these are the legislative agenda. On the left, completed. On the right, they have to be completed. And hopefully, God willing, our desire is to complete those on the left-hand side too. As I speak, like I said, we already have the cybersecurity bill tabled at the House of Parliament. So electronic communications is kind of like 90% complete. So I am actively talking to my boss to see how team members with diverse experience can add their own voice and say to this process. Hopefully that will happen. So let's look at regulations and guidelines. In terms of regulations, we mostly have regulations for the only instrument, because like I said before, regulations are drafted from the legislation. It's the legislation that empowers the enforcing institution, which is the regulator, to draft regulations and will be approved by the ministry, the law officers department, parliament, and it becomes enforceable, right? So because the only instrument in this space that has been there for all this while is the Telecommunications Act of 2006 with its various amendments, we only have regulations around that. And this is about the first time we are seeing something really comprehensive. I mean, the current regulator are really well placed, hopefully, to do more. I am a strong advocate for them, and I did that in one of our forums, one of our engagements on our WhatsApp group, because I know they are doing some great job, and I'm working in sync with them directly. So we have the final draft of electronic communications equipment type approval, so that nobody just brings anything in. We want to ensure that where there are backdoors, hopefully our skills and ability in terms of equipment can grow so that we could be able to see some of these things. The draft of a spectrum regulation, the way spectrums are being handled here before, a lot of times many people do what they feel like doing, but this is really going to place NatCom ahead of things, hopefully. The quality assurance, quality of service regulations also drafted. The licenses regime, today, everything is one technology. Everything is separated in terms of technological definition, like 2G, 3G, 4G, hopefully 5G or XG, whatever we call it. But there are school of thoughts that believe that it shouldn't be like that, because that's just nomenclature. But discussions are ongoing. But currently we have a draft. You can go on the NatCom website, you will see all of that. We have a final draft for subscriber registration and regulations around subscriber registration. Because as you know, identity management, if not, is the most critical in the participation of users in the digital space. You need to know who is doing what. And that has been a challenge in SLinT. Operators registering users properly on them when need be for national security reasons or criminal reasons. The ability to trace people. Sometimes it has worked, sometimes it's a challenge, but this will ensure that aspect is completely enforced, because if not, then we haven't gotten started in terms of our desire to move digital. The National Numbering Resource Regulation is also there. So, in terms of e-government, speaking for the public space, there are a lot of efforts going on. We are grappling with a lot of things. There isn't a clear e-government policy, but there are some efforts, and I would just like to take you through. Now, because of other efforts going on, we don't have a specific policy speaking to that. But what we did, or what we're currently working on, is having guidelines like SOPs on specifics, like social media. There's a lot of government data that just moves across the public space, some of which might be sensitive, some of which we may not consider sensitive, but that practice is kind of like really bad. A lot of people spend a lot of time on social media whilst working. We want to see, not only in terms of guidelines, but even using technology to control that. The management of our cyber identity, which is the gov.sl domain. That one has to have a regulation and even guidelines in its use. Government emails, so that we stop using our private emails for official purposes. Our online presence, that I would agree to. Our online presence needs to be better than it is. We want to draft guidelines as in what has to be in the public space in terms of government website or service portals. An electronic transaction and archiving guideline as it relates to government data. Government unified communication platform that we are working on currently. We need a lot of guidelines along that. And the next, which even myself can't see, but I know it has to do with ICT related procurements. Because currently, and even in the past, there are a lot of things that people just do because they have to do it. Maybe because they don't know, maybe because they haven't been told what is best. So we want to relate with the procurement authority, the National Procurement Authority, to bring about guidelines as in, you want to buy a server, right? This and this and this and this are the specifications. These and these and these are the guidelines that you have to follow to make sure whatever you are buying is compatible with where we intend to take our technological evolution, right? So I cannot complete this presentation if this is not done, because I'm hopefully expecting a lot of questions that has to do with it. What have you done? Where are you? And all of this, right? So this one really has to do with this strategy. So from the infancy, when we, prior to coming into public service, I was in the private space, but contributing greatly to this process. We were helping government to understand that you can't just grab one project and get it started without a complete view of where really you want to be and what's the expected impact. I hope I'm within time. I have like 2 more slides.
Okay, 5 more minutes.
Okay,
I was
great.
about to just post
I think I've
yeah.
done well.
Yeah, thanks. Yes.
Right? So
yes.
basically in its infancy, this was like a blueprint of where we want to be in the future. Because as you know, the internet is a interconnection of networks, right? But primarily networks are basically for resource and service sharing. So do all the investment. If you don't have back-end systems with the services created that really adds the value, then it's become a social media thing, yeah? Which also has its own value because you can run a whole commerce space on social media. But then you cannot have localized impact because the solutions that will speak to your automation processes will not be there. So this is the blueprint of what we really said it needs to look like having data center and cloud infrastructure, making sure connectivity across the board, like we have now, terminating at the borders of Guinea and Liberia. Terrestrially, it's been there for like 4 years, active, and the operators are using it, thank God. The submarine is there, so they could use bandwidth leasing as a means of accessing that. And the last mile energy technology, as you guys will dictate the future. Ensure the government, e-government services are also active and there across public and private institutions. We would hope not only to see the traditional mobile operators, but would also like to see innovative ideas as in MVNOs and OTT-related providers, because you have the connectivity and you have the space, you can do anything. And then seeing the uptake of ICTs across the educational sector and priority areas across government. Then also support industries by reason of this effort, right? Which translates into personal or home users, donor partners, and related. This is the future we are hoping to create. I hope I'll be there till we get that completed. But then, so that was where we were in the past administration. And that has not changed. That's the good thing. I'm so happy personally, because a lot of things keep changing in the country. But in this space, a lot doesn't change. Rather, we consolidate. So when this new administration came, based on the good things that have been done in the past, right from the early 2000s onto the administration of the previous government, onto this new one. So the efforts have been consolidated. This one says, okay, now that we have a little bit of infrastructural investment, let us see how we could build the services and latch on technology to ensure our governance system is accountable, to ensure it is efficient, and it is good for everybody, which means inclusive and affordable access that really creates opportunity for the common person, leveraging broadband. So key areas in this strategy, by the way, this has been drafted. We would also have lend the opportunity to SLinT to have it say. So we would have an assignment, because one of the things I'm looking at now as the lead, to have a platform collaboratively, not only for ICT policy and related, but policies, regulations, strategies, legislations across government, have a platform where people can collaborate and develop these things. And it will be there like an archive forever. So when you say, I need to have an opinion about how X was done, you have the historical sequence and all of this, right? Which will help us going forward in the future. That's one of the technology platforms I'll be hoping to leave as a legacy as an individual that my team is working on. When I say my team, I have a small innovation team, by the way. So the priorities were leadership, governance, coordination, and partnership, because we realized that Ministry X will go to donor and say, I need money to do XYZ because of ICT. That donor will chip in. Another agency will go, I need this. So there is no coordination like you saw in the presentation. And I talk about the brick and mortar approach, silo implementation, a lot of things. So this strategy will address that. Human capacity building. So the need to improve on digital skills so that our development will be sustainable. So take all the investment and bring the most modern technology. If we don't have the localized ability to sustain and improve on these efforts, then that development is not sustainable, right? So we want to make sure these efforts are not depleted, but rather much value will be added by developing our not only end user skills, but the technical ability to even sustain and do more. Then e-government services. So like I said, there are priority areas of the economy that really require automation. Like in terms of one of the efforts of government is fighting corruption. Yes. Another effort is around education. That has to be automated, because how will you speak to your gains if you don't have data to prove that? I mean, in real time. Another is also tourism, which is doing a lot of things. And my innovation team is working with tourism assiduously. Hopefully in the next 6 or 8 weeks, we'll have one product in that space that really addresses some concerns around COVID. We have digital infrastructure and access. That is not only consolidating what is there, but also improving on it. Today, we don't have data center. All of what we do is hosted in the cloud. That doesn't help in terms of having a digitally savvy space. We need to have the ability to create our own content. If we create them, taking them out of Sierra Leone, it's going to be a lot of costs, right? So the government is assiduously working on investment along that currently, and even now trying to make sure connectivity across the terrestrial space is kind of totally completed, which is why, had it not been for COVID, the second version of the national broadband infrastructure would have started. All equipment, fiber cables, everything is in country right now. So hopefully that will take fiber to not almost every district, and it will also bring along metro fiber in major population centers. So that will now help the operators to latch on that and begin to deliver possibly GE speeds across to their customers. And you know about DSTR, right? As an institution, it's a priority of government to make sure there is innovation. But that DSTR really goes beyond digital innovation. But in our own space, one of the things that this strategy will speak to is to stimulate digital innovation and entrepreneurship. So not just about creating or thinking through ideas, but translating those ideas into commercial value. They have to be commercially successful, not only creating for creation's sake.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. We're way over time, so I'm sorry.
And actually,
yeah.
thank you, because cybersecurity is important.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, you're done?
Yes, I am.
Oh, great.
I was actually
right
on my last slide.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for a fantastic in-depth presentation. We'll have our President Tamba, Lamin, and our Secretary General Alie to kind of have a conversation with you around this topic for about 15 minutes, we'll say, and then we'll take open questions to everyone from the audience. So Tamba, Alie, anything you can contribute and ask questions so James can open it for us.
So first and foremost, I'll say thank you very much, Mr. James, for the presentation. I think such a presentation was long overdue. I'm glad that we have done this. Myself, I have learned a lot within the past few days that we started discussing about this presentation. I had always believed that we already had Electronic Transaction Act.
I'm sorry, Tamba, 1 second. James, can you make the host again so that we can mute people that are making noise in the background?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry, Tamba.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, so I've said again, thank you very much, Mr. James, and Alie, who started this discussion to bring to our awareness that there is such an act. I personally, I wasn't aware of it at all. I always assumed that it was already in place and that we already had these things there. So there are lots of questions from the audience. I'm not going to take it from them, but I would say thank you, Mr. James, and thank you, Alie, and thank you, everyone. Everyone who is participating, we thank you very much for participating, and we welcome your questions. I will put priority over your questions and hold back my questions for now, so that at least we can get your questions answered. And this is in the interest of time, and this is to make sure that we make good use of your time. We will have the opportunity to get these questions answered one way or the other. But because you are here, we want to give you the opportunity to ask your questions so that Mr. James can actually answer them for you. So Alie, I don't know what you want to add, but there are some questions in the chat. And you can probably start by posing those questions so we can see how it goes.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I also want to thank everyone, including Mr. Cobba here. I mean,
there are two Cobbas.
Well, Mr. James Cobba, the host.
No, the guest speaker.
You know, and honestly, I have also learned a lot more than I knew within this hour that we've spent together. And this has been really an eye-opener for me, at least. And to know that, I mean, I'm aware of bits and pieces of things that are going on from a regulatory standpoint. And but to see all of them presented in like a dashboard from what has been passed to what we're working on, or you guys are working on to get passed in Parliament, I think that's great. That shows that there's a lot of work that is going on in the background, and that's a lot of good news for our country. My only concern, and again, I'm just because of time, I'm not going to take away the Q&A, because this is more like our first stab at having public conversations around technology in our country. Especially on policies and regulations. I don't think that this time block is enough. We're definitely going to have more sessions on this specific thing, because it's so important, because it forms the foundation around growth and things to stay stable. Now, my only worry is that there's so much going on at the ministry and among government stakeholders, and I understand there have been engagements between government and private sector or other stakeholders in the development of these policies. But as a citizen of Sierra Leone, I haven't seen enough engagement with Sierra Leoneans. I know that most of these policies have been supported by international donors, and their consultants have helped in providing a lot of input to these policies, and I believe they are built around best practices. My only concern is that we are Sierra Leoneans, this is Sierra Leone, this is ours, and we don't have to fit in the shoes of our donors, and that's the only concern I have, and I'm not going to go deeper into that, because that probably will be a conversation for the next set of sessions. The good news is that events like this will drive interest in government and citizens engagement, and that's a good thing. That is what I'm excited about.
Okay, thank you, Ali. So we have a few questions in the chat, and to the rest of our audience, please type your questions in the chat. I think it will help us all, instead of just unmuting everyone and we start getting background noise.
Right.
So let's start by reading the questions in the chat first and see if Mr. James, how he can address those. And I will hand it back over, I guess, to Aminata to pick that up.
Yeah. Thank you, Tamba. James, just a couple of questions in the chat. One is from Saidu Kaba. He asked a question, is that question for James, where can SLinT fit into this equation? Let's talk about practical and cost-effective space for SLinT to get into, with an immediate impact.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I said, we are not oblivious of the fact that there are advancements in knowledge across the board, and which is why personally I'm part of this team, being the lead for that space in the ministry. My boss and the entire team are much more willing to make sure we do that. By the way, it's really the best thing to do, because there are diverse experiences that people can bring in that could add so much value. What we may see, others may not see, but then we would seek to ensure collaboration happens. Even locally, we don't bring to public or approve any policy without stakeholder engagement. So whilst membership of SLinT is all over the globe, but practically it's also a community of stakeholders that have to be consulted. So rest assured, we would engage.
That's good. Thank you. And we have another question from Josh. He said, good presentation. How does the relationship between NatCom and private telecoms companies looks? Can you walk us through basic steps in how they are regulated in terms of how they set floor prices and internet access? How to ensure customers are actually benefiting from what they pay for? That is, no tricks or hidden costs from those companies. Can you comment on cost of internet access in Sierra Leone compared to countries of the MRU? What is the current internet penetration in the country?
Oh, that's a big one. So one thing I was really
Plenty.
sure of, that is that a lot of questions were going to come in, which is why I had to slate this presentation this way. Because even if we have spoken about policies, there are some concerns that people just want to be addressed. So which is why the submission was in this format. Now, in terms of NATCOM and operators, of course, it's like the referee and the footballer, right? So there is the body, which is the policy ministry that really sets the agenda. Then legislations, in addition to that, amended or not, that's what NATCOM will use. So NATCOM will do analysis of best practices, not only in Sierra Leone, but across the region, because they have community of regulators, and try to see how that is adapted locally. I wouldn't want to compare the cost of broadband in Sierra Leone to that in Kenya or in Ghana or in Nigeria. I could compare in terms of speed, but not cost, because in Sierra Leone we have a single landing cable. So, which means there is some form of monopoly, which is really not the case. That's where all of them are connected. And service costs are high. Hopefully, when we get another cable or multiple cables, we'll see cost-related concerns will dwindle down. What I know, because I'm also a user and I buy capacity for my phone and my fixed line at home, I think there has been marked improvement since 2013 to now. Since the investment in submarine and terrestrial network, there has been marked improvement, not only in terms of cost, but also in terms of quality and in terms of access. Let me stay technical here, at least. Let me just say something around. So now, you all know that the migration from 2G onto 5G or XG is basically around what? It's around speed and capacity, right? So now, even with the huge investment in fiber networks, there is no migration path from 2G to 4G, from 2G to 3G. There are some elements that will change, but when it comes to 4, which is really the future, 4, 5, there's going to be a complete change. All you could use possibly are the physical towers. Even your human resource you may not use, because they will require new types of skills and knowledge and all of that. That has huge cost implication. So the transition period from where they are now, I mean the operators, to where we would love to be as end users is really costly and time consuming. That is why they've not been able to fully harness the investment that has been done in the broadband space. Until that is fully harnessed, costs may not really come down as is expected. But actually, it's coming down. There has been marked improvement, because I also buy, right? I don't have free gifts because I work with the ministry. I also buy. There has been marked improvement.
Great. Thank you. So there's another question from Francis Stevens George. Where do you see financial inclusion in in your strategy priorities? The STI commercializing innovation. Really? I disagree. Commercializing is the role of the private sector.
I just wanted to.
I'll speak to that too.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
So the first question speaks about what again? Sorry.
Where do you see financial inclusion in
financial inclusion.
priorities?
Yeah. So technology is just an enabler to that, right? We are not the principal, the ministry is not the principal authority for financial inclusion. That's done by the central bank. We create technology-related policies and regulations that will guide that space, as in how ICT can be useful in that space. Notwithstanding the fact that when a mobile operator wants to do mobile money, for example, they would have to have a license from the the central bank, which is the financial regulator, because mobile money is a value-added service. So they have to secure licenses or permission from the central bank. So as of today, we have like 2 mobile money service providers here. And then there is an effort, an innovation effort, competition specifically by the central bank for digital financial inclusion, of which there are a lot of interesting products being built right now. Even there are foreign companies that are participating in that competition. So hopefully, maybe in the next 12 to 18 months, we'll see products in that space. Already, some are already advertising that they are coming up.
Is that a specific timeline, or that's just a guesstimation?
It's an estimation because like I said, some are already doing some advertisement. Possibly I could send some links. Like you could check out, there is EasyPay SL, which I think is from one of the other African countries, but specifically being regulated here as because they have the desire to hopefully win the competition. So within the next 12 to 18 months, we'll be seeing some digital wallet services in that space. Innovation. So when you listen to the president, one of the things he will encourage people is you have to go and farm. But practically, I'm not a farmer. I don't go to the garden, right? My farm is IT. And having been around the academia for more than a decade, I constantly innovate. So I have a team of young guys that we are thinking and creating a lot of things. The intention is to help young people to start, own, and run successful technology enterprises. Maybe when you see those coming, so it's not like me. So when you work in the public space, you are really not restricted in doing something extra, but it doesn't have to conflict. What we are trying to do is not in competition with anybody. Even if it has to be, there has to be decent. So the effort is primarily hosted at the University of Sierra Leone, but that's an idea that I have been leading. So that's what I'm saying. So from that space, we'll hopefully be seeing some commercial products coming, not only for social value, but so that they can be sustained financially.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all right. So John is asking, in the midst of our current fiber existence in our nation, what are the main factors influencing the seemingly exorbitant cost of international cellular calling, especially for calls originating from the US?
I would like to.
But I think Alie wanted to say something, right?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I know that there's so many things bubbling around technology, the use of technology, internet penetration, cost, and all of that. I would like to carefully admonish questions that we, in interest, so we don't digress from policies and regulations, because which is the subject here. Because if we're talking about NATCOM, we can go all day. That's a whole new space altogether about Sierra Leone. You know, and cost also in fintech and financial inclusion and all of that. They are valid questions, but I would probably, because we have a lot to dig into the regulations that have been passed and what the strategies are that we're looking at, or you guys are looking at as a ministry, as a government, to direct those strategies into actionable items. You know, those, I think that probably I would like to maybe want to draw attention to that a little bit, like the Electronic Transaction Act that has been passed for you, Mr. Cobba. What are some of the specific strategies into adopting what the clauses are in that regulation as far as the government is concerned for the people of Sierra Leone?
Okay, so like I said in the submission, in the presentation, that Electronic Transaction Act was basically to improve, primarily to improve on our rating as a country in doing business, and also to help in making sure that electronic evidences are admissible in the court of law, like validating electronic transaction by law. Now, in the course of doing that, there are some other elements that came in. So normally, once you say that, the direction mostly shifts to commerce-related things. But then it goes beyond that. Every other element that is done electronically has to be valid by law. And then also consumers or users in that space has to, the law mandates the creation or the drafting of regulations by the regulator to make sure people feel confident in transacting electronically, whether from commerce perspective or from social perspective. So basically, that was the focus of that instrument. So in terms of strategy, the digital transformation strategy will specifically speak to those issues, but regulations around that will be done by our converged regulator, which is NATCOM, and hopefully when the communications bill goes to Parliament and passed into law, they will be much more empowered to do regulations at a broader scope. So since the passing of that bill, which was just towards the, not too far from COVID, actually nothing has happened. It was just a milestone that requires practical step. But in that bill, there are things like PKI, which is identity management. So currently for national identity, that is handled by the National Registration Authority, NCRA. They have been thinking of seeking for partnerships so that we could have PKI infrastructures locally. But in that bill, PKI are identified as services that will be provided by registered service providers. Certification authorities were also mentioned there and those kind of things. So that bill creates room for that. So once we move into some form of stability, that is going to be the next stage of how providers can be encouraged to enter into the space and help us with services of those nature.
Great, thank
Okay.
you. We got a message, a question from Tamba, our president. He's asking if DSTI is regulated. And he said, does the government have plans to regulate it if it doesn't, or if it's not? What is or will be regulated? What is and or what will be will be the relationship between DSTI, Ministry of Information and Communication, and NATCOM?
I know Tamba is talking. Tamba, I think that is deliberate. But let me tell you what I know deliberate? Discussions are, right? Tamba is almost always around, right? So remember I said something during my submission, which is policy pronouncements are political. And they keep changing when administrations change. This is my experience being across government, being around government, right? DSTI is an establishment by reason of presidential priority, okay? DSTI is not like NATCOM. NATCOM is established by an act of parliament. So they are totally different. NATCOM is regulator. DSTI is a priority given to innovation, science, technology, and innovation, which is really a good thing from a policy point of view. The Ministry of ICTs, or Ministry of Information and Communication, is the supervising ministry, the policy and supervising ministry that deals with that space. Now, so on a personal note, time goes beyond ICTs, right? So ICTs are just a component around which innovations can be developed. But the beauty with ICT is when you understand the fundamental principles, even with almost nothing, you can get started with something. So naturally, people will tend to cling onto the easiest path as you grow to be at your best. There is innovation around agriculture. Agriculture is priority for the government, right? There could be innovations around tourism, right? There could be innovations around healthcare. So ICT is just one space. In its initial years, Tamba, which I guess you know, there have been a lot of who does this, who does what, I'm doing this, I have to do this. So that is normal. Because somebody new is coming into the space, and then somebody all may think, oh, this guy wants to take my job, or these people are trying to do what I'm doing. So there is that protectionist thing, as is the case right now between the US and China. China is rising.
That's two different countries, though. This is one
Huh?
country. That's two different countries. The comparison.
Well, I'm just saying, when somebody is rising and you're already there, you kind of like try to protect and consolidate what you're doing. So, but basically what I'm saying, it's normal to have this kind of differences, but we serve the same government, right?
Correct.
This week on Thursday, as we speak, this week on Thursday, we shall be having a discussion on this subject, on delineation of roles and responsibilities. GSTI will be there, NATCOM will be there, SALCAB will be there, the MIC will be there, because we are working for the same government. So we want to see how best we could separate our roles and responsibilities and use our individual strengths synergetically to serve the people of the country. So I don't think going forward, I wouldn't expect going forward, these conflicts will keep increasing, but rather they will keep coming down as we understand ourselves and collaborate more for the good of the country.
James, I want to follow
Thank you very much.
I want to follow up with that. Thanks for that explanation, but I want to follow up with that. So DSTI is an agency or directorate within the government as the head of policy and legislation or regulations. That's supposed, in my opinion, from my view, your department is supposed to regulate everyone regardless of where they are. And from a security perspective, they are also using data or using information that needs to be protected from all the sectors and from all the citizens, right?
Mm-hmm. So
why should there be even if or roles or anything, they should be regulated or be under the same umbrella as everybody else. There should not be a definition of roles. That should be under processes, right? So in terms of regulations and policy, I'm thinking you all should be under the same umbrella. Why is there a conflict there?
Okay, so
in terms of
let me be clear. Yeah, let me be clear. When it comes to ICTs, right, it's the MIC that takes the lead. DSTI is an institution established by government to support innovation in science and technology across various sectors. And MIC is just one. But in terms of the digital agenda, digital governance, regulations or guidelines, as in the uptake and use of ICT across government, that is the role of MIC. There's no conflict there. There's no conflict.
So they should be under the same umbrella, policy in terms of policies, regulations.
Not exactly. The scope of their work is cross-cutting, right? So the element of their work that has to deal with us is under our supervision. Like, for example, we are doing a government-wide collaboration platform. We call the shot. They have to use it. We call the shot on that. How and what people should do when it comes to ICT, we call the shot. That's our role. So it is possible. So it is possible. Let me just make it clear, right? Because that's one of the discussions we'll be having. It is possible that when the president serves his term and leaves gracefully, a new person will come, a new president will come, whether even from the same party or not, that will say, no, I don't think I need the STI, right? It has to go, it's not my priority. then it will be dead and becomes history. So institutions that have to sustain the effort across governance, like I said in the ICT space, they are validated by legislation.
Okay.
And that is not the case for DSTI. Maybe along the way, the government will decide that we want to translate this into legislation because science, technology, and innovation is a key priority across the globe, and we can't be left behind.
Correct.
That
Thank you
could
for
be my
that.
opinion if I were there, right? But the STI is not established by legislation, and things can change. But the level of collaboration keeps growing. In its infancy, yes, but things are changing because we are working for the same person. So like I said, even on Thursday, we shall be having discussion, not only on our role as a ministry, but even the role of DSTI in the National Digital Transformation Strategy.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cobba. I think this is a sensitive and important topic that we touched on. Like you said,
It was
deliberate to ask the question because some of us in the call here, I believe, have experiences seeing this. And to the best of my understanding, like you said, DSTI is definitely a political initiative. It is a political priority from the president's office. And every president in every country actually have that right? If you think about the United States, right, when President Obama took office, he created the Open Government Initiative under the White House, and then popularized that initiative. And that initiative got popularized to the point that some acts were passed in the background, and today departments and agencies are using it. But guess what? There is no Open Government Initiative office in the White House anymore because he left. And then the next president came and said, no, I don't care about open government. I'm not going to put that office in my office anymore. The same thing with Sierra Leone, right? Sierra Leone adopted the Open Government Initiative under the previous government. They actually had an office within the State House. It was not legislated. And they were doing great things. New government came, forgot about it, and they introduced DSTI. So these things are normal. I think most of us will understand that. What we wanted to get into really was all the news headlines that, for example, I see about using ICT as the background for innovation, because that has been the core message of the DSTI. And if DSTI's core message is leveraging ICT for innovation, then I personally believe that there should be a tight relationship between DSTI and the Ministry of Information and NATCOM, who are the policy holders and the policy makers of ICT, because all of their innovation is based on ICT. I don't think I have seen anything published by the DSTI that haven't touched ICT. I think I've just seen apps being created and published, and every one of them are ICT. I haven't seen them done anything in the farming industry. For example, they've created, say, a new machine that can be used to brush my farm or to blah, blah, blah. Everything has to do with ICT. That was the background of that question. But not to belabor that, I'm going to ask another question, which is, this act came into place sometime in December last year. And I, for example, became aware of it when we started discussing this. What is the government doing to popularize this act among the citizens of the country so that the citizens can know that there is an Electronic Transaction Act, and if you send a message on WhatsApp to someone and that message is intercepted by the government can now use that message against you in the court of law because electronic transactions are now legal. What is the government doing to make people aware of these things? And I'm going to be a little controversial here and even say, is this law one of the backbones behind the holding of Sylvia Blyden? Because everything about the Sylvia Blyden holding right now is based on electronic transaction and electronics, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, but
Okay.
I have to say, and I have to be on the controversial side of it.
I wish, yeah, thank you, Timan. But honestly, I wish I was a politician. Then some aspects I will respond. But I prefer staying as a professional, and that's what I'll do justice to here. In terms of popularization, when we passed that act, we were all over the media trying to help people understand what this all is about, what value will it add, what's our responsibility as users. What I will agree, after the passing of that bill into an act, we haven't done much in terms of engagement. The reason was, even when we were in Parliament discussing that bill, a lot of the questions that were coming were not really specifically around that bill. It was more of cybersecurity. So what we concluded was in 3 months, we will table the cybersecurity bill. Now, when we table that and defend it very well and conclude on that, we will now bring both documents together and start a whole nationwide campaign in helping people really understand what really this is all about. Because the focus of the bill and the trend of discussions, the pre-legislative discussions onto the final tabling was more around cyber. So be assured that we will do more to make sure. So it's not just about the ordinary people, right? Even whilst we also work in government, this bill affects us. Even whilst we are putting some of these things together, we try not to stay selfish, but some of which may not seem normal based on our individual perspective. But government is government, right? And our job is to make sure professionally we support government in its priority across the board. So for the one that has to do it, if they are abiding, of course, definitely I can't speak to that. The judges and the lawyers and the prosecutors can speak to that because that's their job. That's really not my job. I'm just here to speak because I'm part of this team. I'm not a
Good
politician.
point. Yeah, before we proceed, James, can you please make Salebi the host? We're not able to do anything because we're all locked out.
Oh, you guys are locked out?
Technically. But while you're doing that, Saidu Cobba is asking for follow-up on his question. I want to get to that, but I want to get to the other people so everybody have a chance to get responses to their questions.
Okay, so.
All right. So Francis Stevens.
Yeah. What's Saidu's question?
Well, Saidu's questions initially was. Let me read it again. Hang on. Uh-oh. Where's Saidu? Okay.
I see a question above, right? Below
Mr.
George
Leby,
from
right?
Amadou.
Mr. Leby, right?
Yes, Salebi.
Salebi, do you see a question above from Amadou? There's a question that says, I am curious as to where is security of private identifiable information covered within DSTI or even SLinT? Do we audit information systems in the country? And then I think.
So who's that from?
That was from
Mr. Leby, you are the host.
Oh, thank you,
That
James.
question was from Amadou, and there is a follow-up question, I believe. DSTI mandate is process enhancement in and across government. That's not really a question. And Amadou also asked for the legislation, and Mr. Stevens asked a question about, James talk about knowing what we are up to. We need to be careful. Weak institutions with ICT is not combination. I don't mind the government knows who I am, but I do mind if they want to know what I am. At least 2 or 3 questions.
So several things have been said, Tamba, right? So
right.
what I speak to?
Yeah, let me make a comment while James is getting his notes together to respond to those questions. I wanted to know, stakeholders were engaged in the development of the policies or of the regulations that have been passed, and the ones that are in front of Parliament right now for deliberation, the bills. I'm curious to know who those stakeholders, or what was the constituent of the stakeholders that were involved in both the regulations that have been passed and those that are still in front of Parliament.
Okay, so
not to get in front of the other questions, you can get to that later.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay.
This is more specific. The others we are not kind of really specific. Let me just
well.
To this.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead.
Yeah. So let me be generic, right? So if we are putting together a legislation or an act, a bill that has to do with healthcare, the stakeholders around that sector and the sector stakeholders within the ICT and telecoms environment, the local council's representation, and the civil society are the principal people that really are kind of engaged in any strategy, policy, and legislative process. Because you want to bring in people who these instruments will affect, that would have a say, because mind you, what we may possibly be doing is just technology enabling something. So we have to be careful not to speak as experts, but rather let the experts in those various areas of technology enablement help us do something better. Like I'll speak to a situation where we supported the Ministry of Health in putting together their digital health strategy. They were critical in bringing together the stakeholders that have to do with their sector, whilst equally from our own side, we brought in the players that have to do with our sector. We sit together and brought out a document. So stakeholders are really not specific. What is specific or what is constant is as long as an instrument has to be developed, whether policy or legislation or strategy, our stakeholders in the ICT and telecom sector will always be there. Sometimes we even bring in the operators when something is not too critical as in government perspective that doesn't require pre-disclosure. We bring them along because they really provide the last mile solution to the end users. We don't interact with them directly, right? So that's kind of like the baseline we set in developing any one of these instruments.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So just to give everybody the opportunity to get their questions answered, can we just go backwards a little bit? Again, Saidu's question was about SLinT and SLinT's involvement in, let me go back. Okay, hang on.
I think that's answered.
Yeah, it was answered, but he felt like he needs a follow-up. But I want to give other people also the opportunity to get their questions answered. So I will come back to that if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the next one was Francis Stevens, who said the BSL allows development within a regulatory sandbox. My question was alluding to the lack of financial inclusion. No, that was a follow-up question. Inclusion due to lack of access in remote areas.
So I wouldn't want to speak much about the STI because they have their mandate, right? If we require more information about what they are supposed to do, they have their website, right? You could go there and see what really they are supposed to do. If we think they are doing what they are not supposed to do, I can speak to that.
We'll bring them in.
Right? You bring them up. Hopefully this is our maiden engagement, right? You can bring them in. We'll all be in the house, and where we have to come in, we'll step in. So the one that has to do with the STI, let's keep that and bring them in. But where we have cross-cutting responsibilities, of course, I can speak to what we are supposed to do, because as long as the government of Sierra Leone exists, the Ministry of Information and Communication, or maybe they will call it innovation or communication technology, whatever be the nomenclature, the mandate around technology will never change. It will stay with that ministry. So that's the point.
All right, I know Tamba read Amadou Masali's message, questions before, but I don't think you answered it. He said, I am curious as to where is security of private identifiable information covered within DSTI. I know that's not your expertise, but you can speak of PII from a legislative and policy standpoint, right, from your ministry.
Yeah, so like I said, unfortunately...
Hang on 1 second. He asked, do we audit information systems in the country? That was part of his question.
So yeah, they do. They do. Like the most critical system we have in country, which is the Integrated Financial Management Information System, with the IFMIS that is used to manage all the finances of the country. It's been audited, yeah. It is. We also have ASICUDA, which is managed by the National Revenue Authority. These are all World Bank related sponsored projects, and they still have a hand and say in there. So yes, they are being audited. In terms of private sector, yes, they are also being audited. It's a normal best practice, right? Like the banks.
Who are
Digital
responsible?
I think let's help clarify. I think the question is it's loaded. So let me see if I can help split it up. The information technology audit that's being referred to here is an audit performed by an information technology professional / auditor from an accounting standpoint that checks who have access to the system, what has been done with that system, what has been deleted, who has deleted it. Basically, it checks the system, not just from a financial standpoint, but from a system security, integrity, confidentiality, everything standpoint. And if such is done, are those reports ever published to the public to tell that it is safe to use this system?
Thank you very much. That's exactly what I'm speaking to, right?
Good.
As recent as before the close of last year, there was somebody in country contracted by the World Bank specifically for an IFMIS technology audit, right? So we do that, yes, and the reports, recommendations, and all of these stuffs were given to us and the Ministry of Finance on what best can be done to make sure the integrity of a system is maintained. Yes, that is done. But like I said, we don't, currently, if you look at the presentation I did, most of the efforts have been around infrastructure, which is normal. That's the baseline, beyond which we begin to develop services. So as we are doing that, you will see that we are also bringing in legislation, strategies, and guidelines so that going forward, when these services are deployed, there will be guiding principle to ensure integrity is maintained. So yes, for the systems we have now, yes, audits are being done on it.
So let me follow up on that question and ask a very, again, another controversial question. Does the Ministry of Information audit every single MDA website that is published out to the public before it is published?
Kind of yes, no. Yes, in the sense, we have ICT officers that are being posted across to ministries, not agencies and departments. That's their responsibility. Can more be done on that? Certainly yes, which is why if you look at my presentation, we realize there's a weakness around that, okay? So we'll be bringing up guidelines as in what has to be done around that. And if we'll do periodic audits, of course. If there is non-compliance, maybe we'll bring that site down or whatever. But if you look at my presentation that was done, you will see that we already know there's a limitation in that aspect and more has to be done.
And if somebody from the public is to present to you information about websites, for example, or ICT applications hosted by the government or published by the government that just doesn't meet the basic security compliance or some other compliances, will you as a ministry and as a policy holder take it upon to actually follow up and shut those websites down if they are not complying, or actually work with them to fix it in a timely manner?
Oh yeah, sure. I wouldn't tell you that we will shut it down. If on my job, I have to recommend a website or a product online to be shut down, there has to be guiding principles that gives me the authority to do that. Currently, there is none. But what we do is we engage and make sure we get things proper. And like I said, we already know these limitations exist. That is why we are putting together guidelines. We'll put together guidelines, would upgrade the skills of our team to make sure they are responsive enough to these needs. So as indicated in my presentation.
Great. Thank you, James. A lot of questions. Um, Let me just, I don't know if I missed anyone's question, but if I do, please raise it up again. But I want to go back. Saidu kind of rephrase his question based on the long question before. He said we are looking for space to get into that. That means ICT technology policies in Salon as an organization of SLinT for immediate impact. Sierra Leone needs, okay, as an immediate impact, what Sierra Leone needs from SLinT now to help, I guess, to innovate technology in the country? How and where we can contribute?
So let's look at it in two senses. Input in terms of policy and legislative processes. I already made it clear that we do stakeholder engagement, and hopefully SLinT will be one institution that will bring on board. So the question, some of the questions you're asking now, we'll be asking ourselves. And we will all be better placed to carefully answer them. That's the first part. The second part is, I think what has happened naturally is the desire to create solutions that have local value. Say what it may, say whatever you may want to say. The establishment of GSTI brought in one thing that I appreciate, which is awareness. There is so much awareness.
In terms of what? Give us specific.
Innovation is a need. Something has to be done. We have to innovate.
So something they brought the awareness. It's like speaking and not doing something. Let me ask, this is not policy or anything like that, but based on your comment, how do you bring awareness and what are you doing for that awareness to actually become active,
That's their job and they are doing it their own way.
So, okay, but I have a question for you since I don't see any other question. Earlier during your presentation, you mentioned that the government has invested significantly on ITC. Am I saying it right? ITC. But everyone is doing their own thing. That kind of concerned me. And you mentioned about financial costs in terms of losing. And in that kind of environment where everybody's doing their own thing in terms of government, you're not actually get your return on investment, right? What is the government doing in terms of policy guidelines or regulations or something to centralize that kind? Because the government at least should have the fundamentals they need in terms of everything ICT. What are they doing to make, to centralize those kind of processes, to increase that kind of processes where everybody's following one specific or there are many specific guidelines that they will have in place? Or even if they have them in place to follow, is it possible that because they don't have anything in place, that's why everybody's doing their own thing? Or is it that they're not holding agencies and ministries accountable to follow the guidelines? Like, give us a clarity on that and why that is happening, because they're losing money. That's our money, technically. That's the taxpayers' money, right? I think.
Okay. What is happening to Sierra Leone is not peculiar to Sierra Leone. So let's be specific here. When we look at how technology grows, you know that what is happening is natural. When you, 10 years down the line, the concept of cloud was in its infancy, right? Meaning, everybody kind of like have their own system. There was the mindset of securities was, oh, everything has to stay local. I have to be in charge of what I'm doing. Now, as connectivity and access increases, the need for silo approach of back-end systems and operation drastically changes, which is what brought in the concept of data centers and, well, cloud services. So we are going through that natural trend as is every other person, which is why, because of this investment that has been done across the board and specifically around connectivity, we are saying now, let's harness this investment by bringing all of these resources together, put together the necessary controls as in who access what, and see how we get started. That is equally so why we are putting together guidelines. As we speak, we are currently deploying a government-wide collaboration platform, which really started with a government-wide VoIP and centralized email systems. It wasn't like that before, right? Even whilst we are doing that, there are a couple of people that still want to maintain the status quo. So we are responding to that by using instruments as in policy and guidelines to force them to do it. So we are not oblivious of what is happening, but it's just a natural trend, and we are doing our best to live up to that expectation.
So how would you hold those people who think the status quo is good for them and don't want to move on? How would you hold them accountable to follow or abide to those policies and guidelines?
So that's where regulations will come in. I wouldn't want to be personal. I will tell you what I will do, but I wouldn't want to be personal.
No, not
So
at
if
all.
we say, for example, right, everybody has to minimize their social presence during work time because you are killing the internet bandwidth. Actually, internet is not a problem right now across government. I would expect so in situations where the internal networks are prepared to drive the traffic that comes in. So internet is kind of not a problem. So as an example, if you don't, then by reason of policy, we can control that using technology, right? You say, okay, if you want to do your social media thing, you come in earlier before time, by 10 o'clock, it's down and comes up at 4 o'clock. So there are various measures that can be taken right from punitive and technology standpoint. So I wouldn't want to preempt, but we are looking into all of those possibilities to make sure enforceability is key.
What I would like to add to that, is it's a hope that someday sooner, James, I think James here is representing the Ministry of Information. I wish we had representation from DSTI and NATCOM as well.
Set us up.
Yeah, but what I would hope, as far as helping to consolidate technology and have like a single targeted focus in our country, is to really see something in the future where we have DSTI or something similar like that, and the Ministry of Information converge into an entity that will be responsible for driving and implementing technology across government, irrespective of where we are. I think the Ministry of Information is there, and James, I'm sorry to say, your ministry is not very effective in enforcing technology across government. It is still, your ministry has the mandate, the regulation backs you, your ministry, but you don't have control. The Ministry of Information does not have control across technology. Things are still so decentralized that they are not efficient at all. And DSTI is now a new mix in the equation. And there's this infight in the battle for supremacy between your ministry, your Ministry of Information,
Okay, now
and DSTI.
You're also going down that line.
Let me speak to that. Let me just give you an update.
Stay away from DSTI.
Yeah, Tamba started that line, and now
let me give you an update. Let me give you an update. As part of this strategy and policy review effort that is going on, it's going to establish institutions. I think that I did not mention, maybe forgetfully. So one of the institutions that will be established will be the ICT Development Agency, which will be the sole authority for implementation of ICTs across government. That will not even be the ministry. So the ministry will be there for policy and sector supervision, oversight. Policy and oversight, well, of course, legislation. We'll have a single converged regulator, which will be the policeman. DSTI will remain DSTI as in how the government sees it. So like I said, I wouldn't want to speak much to that. They have their role. We have ours. But few institutions will be established. Hopefully, this year we'll conclude those documents and they'll be translated into what they need to be. We'll hopefully establish the ICT Development Agency Authority, the Universal Service Authority, which deals with closing the digital divide gap in terms of connectivity, right? So that institution is already there, but we want to see how their mandate can be increased, because currently it's just about having service, mobile service in a community. But it should go beyond that now. So when we have that kind of scenario, when these institutions being established, I think it will also sanitize the atmosphere all the more. That is why you can see that in our strategy as presented.
Okay. I have so many billion questions in my head, but I want to read some of the questions from the chat as well. Salebi, the host, who cannot unmute himself, is asking, what is or are digital applications that you use currently that you would say are successful, both mobile and application-based?
In governance, in the public sector, or in the country generally?
Generally.
Generally. He unmuted himself.
Maybe government.
You sure generally? Let's start with the government.
Yeah, maybe government.
Okay, so Tamba will give some aspects of the generic part, the generic part, and then I will speak to government.
Yes.
Okay, so I know you want us to stop creeping and run, but
but you guys have been creeping for a long time. Never
that's
mind.
not how. That's the frustrating part of working in the public sector, right? It takes courage sometimes to be there, because somebody has to be there to help, right? Government is too slow. But what I can say is there are a few good things that have happened. IFMIS, which is, like I said, the big elephant in the room, has its own challenges, but it has been standing the test of time, right? There is Asakuda. It has also been standing the test of time. Today, there is another project going on as it relates to revenue collection and management, the integrated tax management information systems. That may be completed, except COVID affects their timeline, but that may be completed in the next 10 to 12 months, right? So we also have efforts ongoing based on the government priorities that deals with time and attendance. That's currently being rolled out across ministries as we speak. There is also the unified communication platform that is being rolled out in like 60% of the ministries now as we speak, and we hope to scale that across the country. So those ones seem successful, but specifically across ministries, there are some efforts going. Across ministries, agencies, and departments, there are some efforts ongoing. For example, in the procurement department, the National Procurement Authority, they have received funding to be supported by the World Bank to automate government-related public procurement, right? So hopefully we would see the uptake of service across ministries, agencies, and departments grow by a significant amount in the next 2 years, because that's where all efforts are going. Even in the healthcare space, there have been sandbox efforts to develop applications that has to do with digital health. In education, there are some private sector efforts going around that to see how that can be automated. So there are a lot of things going on. We hope, I know some will fail, because not all innovations move from its infancy to full-blown service, but I believe some will succeed. Tamba, you can help.
Wonderful. Thank you, thank you. Let me see. Well, people are suggesting a follow-up. And earlier on, before I forget, James, somebody asked if you can share your presentation. So I promised to ask and see if that will be all right. Then if you can share it, then we can share it.
That's the property of the
Yeah.
team.
Oh, okay. So you posted on
Yeah, man.
the group in the group.
Yeah, sure.
All
That's the
right,
property of the
great.
team.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anything else, Tamba, Ali, anybody else on the call that would like to say something?
I think it's a general thank you. Adding on to what Mr. James Cobba just added, definitely there are lots of applications on the private side, like Mr. Stephen George is here running the innovation group in Sierra Leone. Their group is also creating apps. So in essence, what I will say, I think the private sector is moving faster than the government when you think about it from an app standpoint, from an application standpoint.
Which is normal.
Which is very normal, definitely.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And that's the same in the US and everywhere else. The government typically plays catch up, right? Somebody in the private sector is going to create something, that thing is going to go crazy. Everybody is going to use it, and the government is going to step in and say, hey, you're doing too much. Let's regulate you, which is normal. Or let's create something for us internally to use. And all of that is normal and it's okay. If anything, it's the government knowing how to step in to do those regulations, the government being able to adopt some of those things instead of try to reinvent the wheel. So for example, if you see someone from the private sector that have created an app that you can use as the government, instead of you trying to go build another one, you could probably partner with that private sector and give them business instead of you build another one. Those are some of the things that I think we will encourage or will want to see from the government, because it's another way to support the entrepreneurial and the innovation ecosystem to grow in the country. Worldwide, you can look at any government, US government or what, trust me, 80 or 90% of the applications are private sector applications. They are not government built. Unless you look at the defense and other places, but even in defense, I will tell you, a couple of them are built by private sector. So the closer the government gets to private sector, I think the better it will be overall from a application standpoint. And I'll pause there, but I think we have spent almost 2 hours here, and we may want to be preparing to get off now. But thank you all very much.
Maybe some last words from me. I just wanted to speak to something.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I want to agree with Tamba possibly 1 billion times and more. Innovation doesn't come from government. If you say bureaucracy, great. Bureaucracy comes from government. And in which case, my advice to this team, I follow up a lot. I don't post much. Sometimes I only post when there is something I think is not correct, that maybe has to do with my work, that I think people need to have better knowledge about, then I could. But I need to improve on that. But what I would say is we haven't gotten started in Sierra Leone. This is nothing about government, right? I'm speaking as one small person that believes in innovation, that is making some efforts. We haven't gotten started in Sierra Leone. There's a lot that can be done. Whilst there are resistances across, because before coming to government, I was in the private sector and I was doing things, right? I would encourage us to see how we could collaborate and maybe look for commercially viable efforts that could stimulate the space. But we haven't gotten started in anything. For example, I just said that there is a foreign company here that might be the leader in the digital inclusion space. What is stopping us as Sierra Leoneans putting stuff together and make sure we are not left behind? We share in the prosperity, because that's the future. So I would encourage us taking our efforts and our engagement possibly beyond this group and see what can I offer tangibly in the private space. You know, government is government, but if you have value that you can create that is transformative, somebody will listen to you. Somebody will definitely listen to you. So there's a slew of opportunities here. Let's see what we can do as a team.
Thank you for that, James. That is wonderful and very inspiring from your perspective. But in reality, and in my opinion, it's not as easy.
Yeah, sure.
And I know the reason where we can try to innovate individually or as an organization or as a business, entrepreneurs or techpreneurs, but in Sierra Leone, as in any country, the government holds a higher stake and more percentage in the market. So they drive innovation as well in terms of encouraging private businesses to try to
Oh, yeah, sure.
innovate. Right. So it's not as easy. And if, like Tamba said, if the government or well, when we as SLinT, for example, or as IT professionals, we're looking to innovate. And usually, what do we look at? Processes, right? And we try to come up with something and say, okay, this is what we'll do to help the government, of course, being innovated, will innovate the country as a whole. But then if the government doesn't embrace that, it's hard for people to be inspired to continue unless you go private. And when you go private, you're still having to deal with the government in order to get your business or your idea off the ground. So I mean, not to answer that, that was just rhetorical, based on
Okay.
as a Sierra Leonean and what I see, But any last word? By the way, George, let me see, George, I wanted to read that comment to you. Francis Stevens George said, yeah, um, what does he say? I missed the question again. Hang on one second, I'll find it. I want to read it to you. Yeah, he said, I like James. He's a good navigator.
So there is another one, last fintech competition. So
Again.
my only last word to add, my only last word to add to that is, I think as a policy holder and as a ministry, I would beg and encourage you and your leadership to focus on local innovation and local content-based innovation and less on foreign innovation. When I say foreign innovation or anything coming from a foreign or private or foreign company, and I'll say that for some deliberate reason, right? It's never sustainable, right?
True.
Any company can come from anywhere into Sierra Leone, especially in the African context. They can win a bid for some work. They will deliver the work, but most of the time, in my experience as a management consultant and working globally, it doesn't always work if you don't have a strong local network of professionals to first audit that work and make sure the work is delivered correctly. Two, professionals who can be used to transfer that knowledge to them so that the knowledge can stay local and get that company out as quickly as possible. If you don't have these two things, you can spend as many millions as you want into private companies coming from outside country and winning bids and working on government projects or blah, blah, blah. The citizens of that country will gain nothing from it because it's not sustainable long term. What's sustainable long term is training our people, our entrepreneurs locally, even if they don't qualify sometimes for some of the jobs. Put provisions in the policies that will force them to qualify so that the private company can partner with them while they be the lead and pass the knowledge over to them and they own the contract. This is how advanced countries advance, right? This happens in the US, it happens in the Europe. I work on contracts, and I believe most of us here work on contracts all the time where the owner of the contract, it's probably, the contract is like $1 million or $1 billion, but the owner of the contract is maybe one small business and maybe black owned. Guess why? They are owning the contract simply because there is regulation and policy that says no big company can come and bully them. They have to own that contract, which means you, the private company or the big company, have to work with them. You have to transfer knowledge to them. They get the bulk of the share of the money, and that money actually sits within the country. And overall, when the contract is done and that big company leaves, it sticks with the small company, that local knowledge. That is how we grow as a country. That is how we grow as people. not when we want someone new to come in all the time. So that's my last word for you and probably for everyone else. Let the government encourage more local innovation, more local content, more local entrepreneurs, support them, put policies in place for them to win the work, put policies in place for them to be supported to succeed in the work, and do less of foreign private company work.
You know,
We will
Tamba,
not move forward.
I
Thank
think
you
that
very
is
much.
one of the reasons why DSTI was established, right? That is one of the reasons to really stimulate what you're saying. But that has to be done in tandem with the National Procurement Authority. You and I know that I'm also coming from the private sector, right? I used to bid for government contracts. You and I know that as a small startup with a lot of ability and ideas, you can't even get started when it comes to government contracts because the rules and regulations doesn't even get you started. So that has to really be further engagement. I would hope after COVID, maybe my last statement, I would hope after COVID, there was a program we were trying to work on in just a small community to have an annual gathering of on digital innovation and entrepreneurship, like a 2 days program. If you want, we could share some of those ideas, and maybe SLinT can take leadership of that, and we see how much buzz we can create locally. Because sometimes when you engage more, people see that there are a lot of serious people that have ability to do X, Y, Z. That is going to stimulate some whole other conversations that could lead to some positive change.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you
very
very much.
much.
Back to
Yeah,
you,
this
Andrew.
has been really great. Thank you so much for everything, for your time, for your professionalism, for the in-depth information. And I hope we can bring you back as a follow-up as a strategist this time, since strategy is part of your title. So maybe we
I
can
think
talk more.
that's what I would love, yeah.
Yeah, that will be more on most of these questions that they're asking and not specifically on policy, even though policies and
Nobody not going to
regulations
implicate
drive
you.
this.
For me,
You show
Na mango it is, so they didn't have na beach.
you show we say you didn't beat you the eat man
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks everyone and to the audience and participants thanks for the questions, thanks for attending. I know we went over time. This is a conversation that's worth having, and I know we will sit here and talk about this forever if we do, but we're going to break it down into small sessions. So look forward to our notification for um, the mini series that we're going to have in general conversation where we can all contribute also in this conversation and talk about specific things about ICT in Salon. So thank you so much. We will be back hopefully in 2 weeks with another session of this Tech Talk. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
all very much.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Have a good day,
Pleasure.
everyone.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, James.
And
Really do
thank you the host.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good job.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
job. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.